Hello, hi, my name's Ren, and today we're going to talk about the epic highs and lows of filling a sketchbook in just a month, and also all the things I've learned in the process. But before we begin, this whole sketchbook as well as this video are part of a video series I'm calling Fresh Start. It's about coming back to making art after a long burnout-induced break. Part of that whole process is finishing up some projects that have been sitting in my drawer for years now, including this very sketchbook. If you want to see some of the process of filling all the pages, I left the playlist in the description for your convenience. But let's talk about this sketchbook in more detail. It's from Talents and their art creation line, and it came with 80 beautiful blank pages. I really like these sketchbooks. Honestly, I use them all the time. Overall, this whole project was an interesting experience, I would say. I would be lying if I said I had a great time the entire time, but there certainly were more good days than bad, and it has taught me a number of things. And for your convenience, I've compiled those into a handy little list. Let's start with the most important thing before you even start. You have to make sure you actually have the time to draw this much. There is no need for complex mental math or clairvoyance on your side. You just roughly estimate how long it should take based on how fast you usually draw. I managed inside the month I set as my deadline, but originally I had the utterly insane plan to fill the sketchbook in a week. Just 7 days. Luckily, I realized that that was so utterly impossible that I changed my mind before I started, but oh man, that could have really ruined the fun of it for me. And also given me carpal tunnel, probably. So, it's just something to consider. Still, on the subject of time, the second thing I realized pretty quickly is that there simply was not time for making any other art. It's kind of obvious, but it needs to be said. Filling up several pages of sketchbook a day is gonna eat into your free time pretty substantially. Not even talking about the mental and creative energy that goes into it. So unless you have literally nothing else going on in your life except for making art, it's pretty much unavoidable that all other projects will have to be on hold for the time. Personally, after several hours I spent on my own pages every day I was working on it, I didn't even want to think about making more art. But honestly, if you work in a smaller format, this is an A4 sketchbook, by the way, it might be a different story, but frankly, even if you have the motivation and energy to do more in that day, don't forget that your hands and wrists will complain quite loudly if you overwork them too much and too often. Another thing you might want to consider beforehand is the media you work with. Obviously, since speed is pretty important to this whole affair, the last thing you want to do is start covering every page in several layers of paint. Maybe even just one layer of paint, depending on how long it stays wet. The last thing you want to be doing is sit and literally watch paint dry for several minutes before you can turn the page and start on the next one. But also, wet media is not the only concern here. We all have different ideas of what makes a page look or feel finished. So it's entirely up to you what you do. However, just as you don't want to sit there with a wet page, you don't want to spend 40 minutes rendering out every drawing in layers upon layers of colored pencil either. For me, ink ended up being perfect for this. It dries reasonably fast and it looks finished enough without having to add anything else. All the watercolor washes you see on these pages were actually something I added in after the fact because I wanted a bit more color in there. You can decide if you think that's cheating and means I didn't actually succeed before my deadline. Another thing I learned that you might want to consider while planning this whole thing out is that you need to love what you're working on when you start out. Now, obviously, you wouldn't be trying to draw a lot if you didn't already enjoy the process of drawing to a certain extent. But what I mean here is a little more specific. Whatever the subject matter you choose to work on in this sketchbook, it should be something you are excited to draw. You don't need to be good at it, but you need to be really, really, really happy to be doing it, at least when you start out. It can be anything, your favorite fandom stuff, your OCs. For me personally, it was cute animals. Because the truth of it is that, like with any big project, there will come a point where that initial joy wears off. There will be days where you don't even really want to work on it at all, where you're tired or bored, but you drag yourself to your desk anyway because you want to finish this challenge, and maybe it even becomes a little fun once you've gotten started again because you remember how much you love this thing. And now imagine how much more excruciating such a drawing session would be if you already didn't really care for the thing you're drawing at all. If the only thing that got you to open your sketchbook was discipline from the very beginning. You don't want that. This is your hobby. It's supposed to be fun. Don't put yourself in a saw trap of your own making for no good reason. You don't need to. Now, we're getting into the territory of things that are about the process of working on the sketchbook more than the planning phase. The number one thing that helps to keep up with a daily or near daily drawing habit is simple, and it's make it easy for yourself. By which I mean that you should set up your workspace and or routine in a way that there are no additional points of friction between you and your sketchbook. This can take several different shapes. If we're just talking about your workspace, make sure it's accessible and in a state where you can actually do your work. No one wants to spend half an hour cleaning up a pile of random items that they just threw onto their desk in a hurry before they can get started on drawing. Keep your materials close at hand and ideally together, so they're easy to grab and you won't need to hunt for a specific pen all over your home. Or, if you like to work on the go, make sure to actually pack all the supplies you need and have some idea where exactly you'd like to be working. I was always at my desk because I was not about to carry an ink pot around with me, so I made sure to tidy that thing up after every session and trying to keep it clean of clutter as best as I could for the remainder of the time that I wasn't drawing. I was also cleaning out my brushes and water drawers every time, so I had clean ones when I wanted to start for the next day. And if we're talking about your process and not your space, if you know you're on limited time, it can be super helpful to go with subject matters you know how to draw, or at least know that you won't struggle with, as well as using supplies that you're familiar with. This obviously doesn't apply if you plan to use a sketchbook specifically to learn how to draw something or learn how to use a specific supply. Though in regards to this, I would also recommend that you pick a struggle. Either draw something unfamiliar and difficult with your go-to supplies, or draw something easier with unfamiliar supplies. Doing both at the same time sounds like the recipe for a crash out waiting to happen. If, like me, you already know what subject you're going to be drawing, it's also a good idea to gather some reference material up front so you don't get lost on the internet while trying to find some references that you actually like. I personally did have Pinterest boards full of specific animal reference, but I could have done a better job of this, honestly. I still spent a lot of time searching, and that stuff adds up over all those days. If you don't want to be nailed down to anything specific, that's fine, either medium or subject matter. It could be really helpful to make some lists of things you want to be working on or want to be working with and keep them nearby for reference. Maybe tape them into, the end pages of the sketchbook. That way you can always check back for ideas if you have a hard time coming up with something on the fly. And of course, you can always pick a random item from your lists if you're struggling with decision paralysis. Again, to reiterate, you're already gonna be spending so many hours just on the drawing part. The last thing you want to do is stretch that out even longer just of hours of thinking about it, you know. Another important thing to keep in mind while filling all your pages is this. A lot of it might not be up to your usual standards, and what I mean by this is it will be a little bit ugly, or a lot of it, actually. Generally, I try to cultivate a sentiment of, oh, it's fine if it sucks, this isn't serious, in my sketchbooks, but I think this is especially important if the goal is to make a lot of work in a limited time frame, especially if you're trying to learn something unfamiliar. So, try not to be too hard on yourself. It is already going to be hard enough without you, beating yourself up over it. Now, there are two final things I want to talk about, but these are very specific to the way my own brain works, so they might not work for anyone else at all. But I thought I'd share them nonetheless. The first one is something maybe a little unintuitive for such a project, but I think you really don't need to be drawing every single day to make it work. I certainly didn't. In fact, I think breaks like that are actually kind of necessary if you're drawing so much every day. Especially if you can predict that there will be otherwise extremely busy days or days where you'll feel like shit and won't want to draw. In my personal experience, actually having some time off from a project and getting to do other fun things instead of, working on it, it can be a lot more motivating and useful. And that way you're not fighting to draw every single day and build up a bunch of resentment for it. Of course, that also slightly ups the amount of pages you'll have to fill on the days you are actually drawing. But if you don't take too many days off, it's all still very doable. And finally, a mindset that I personally find immensely helpful whenever I work on a big project is that if it sucks, just stop. By which I mean, if working on the thing is no longer fun or otherwise rewarding and you feel like the experience has become a lot more akin to being fed through a meat grinder, then it's okay to just give up or take a longer break before you get back to it if you absolutely want to finish the thing. Now, I'm not talking about, the classic struggle of, oh, this isn't turning out, I'm not having the best time. I'm talking about, oh, this is going really badly and I feel like shit every day. Now, I know that for some people, having the kind of pressure of having to finish this challenge, come hell or high water, is helpful and even motivating to some degree, but I am not one of those. And who knows, you might, be too. For me, just knowing that I actually don't have to do this if I don't choose to is extremely helpful. For one, checking in with myself to see if I'm still having a fun time provides a good opportunity to change things up if I'm having a bad time, or to take a much needed break if I feel like I'm running out of steam. It also means that the part of my brain that reacts to being told what to do with a tantrum stays silent, so I am not fighting myself every time I sit down to work. Knowing that it is indeed a choice and not something that I have to do no matter what makes the whole thing so much more chill, which makes me more inclined to actually do the work. I also am a big proponent of the idea that drawing as a hobby should be fun first and foremost, and so I'm not going to add onto all the anxiety and guilt I already feel anyway by telling myself that I'm a big failure for not following through on a silly little art challenge I set myself. Just remember, even if you make it through, the only thing you really get is bragging rights and a feeling of accomplishment. And I personally don't think those are worth having a horrible time for several weeks. But your mileage may vary on that. Now, would I recommend doing this? Frankly, no, not really. I think if you're one of the few people who gets extremely motivated by the idea and already draws fast and often, this could be a fun experience. Ultimately, though, I don't think there's a particular benefit to pressuring yourself to draw this much in such a limited time. There are less taxing ways to draw a lot and to do it regularly without these parameters around it. I don't even think I would be doing something like this again, maybe ever. And, let's not forget that you can also legitimately fuck up your hands and wrists if you draw too much and don't take care, especially if you usually don't draw this much. Let's not harm ourselves for no other reason than funsies. I know this may not be as much of a consideration when you're young and full of vitality and your bones don't ache from sitting wrong for 5 minutes, but I am pushing 30, so as someone with one foot in the grave, this is a real concern on my end. Without the 30-day time limit, I might enjoy another sketchbook dedicated to exploring drawing with ink, but yeah, not like this. And if I wanted to keep the time limit, I think a much shorter sketchbook might be an interesting challenge, like filling a 20-page watercolor sketchbook in a month or maybe even 2 weeks. But doing several pages a day for a whole month, no, I don't think so. Anyway, that is all I've wanted to talk about today. I'd be curious to hear if you've ever done something similar and what your experiences with it were. And of course, as always with these sketchbook flip-throughs, I would love to hear if you had a favorite page. I can't pick one, there are like 5 I love the most. But yeah, I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I will see you around.